A reformed millionaire is saved by a pair of homeless twins. A few days later, his eyes widen when he receives a text message. The faint hum of the Los Angeles skyline filtered through the half-open windows of Harold Stanley's mansion, a glass and marble fortress perched high in the hills. Inside, the house was eerily still, its silence amplified by the vast emptiness of its pristine rooms. The soft click of Harold's Italian leather shoes was the only sound that disrupted the serenity as he descended the spiral staircase. His movements were calculated, each step deliberate, as if time itself bowed to his command. The air carried the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee, but the scent lacked the warmth it once held. Harold entered the kitchen, a sleek, modern expanse of stainless steel and stone, and poured himself a cup, his reflection staring back at him from the polished surface of the countertop. His face was sharp, lined with age and something deeper, a weariness that no amount of success could erase. On the wall near the entrance to his study hung a framed newspaper clipping, yellowed with time. Stanley Syndicate, dismantled, infamous crime boss vanishes, the headline declared in bold, accusatory print. Harold's eyes lingered on it for a moment, his jaw tightening imperceptibly. His hand trembled as he reached for the doorknob to the study, as if opening the door invited ghosts into the room. The study's interior stood out sharply from the rest of the house. The shelves were filled with books and binders meticulously arranged, but the desk bore signs of a man tethered to his past. Papers were neatly stacked, and a fountain pen lay perfectly aligned, yet it was the drawer on the right, locked and untouched, that seemed to hold the most significance. Harold paused, his hand hovering over the drawer. He exhaled, long and slow, before retrieving a small brass key from his pocket. The lock clicked open with a quiet finality, and Harold pulled the drawer free. Inside was a modest collection of items, a faded photograph of a young girl with golden curls and mischievous eyes, a delicate bracelet made of cheap plastic beads, and a weathered music box. His fingers brushed against the photograph, lingering on it, as if the image might dissolve beneath his touch. Amber. Her name resonated in his mind, akin to a whisper echoing through an empty canyon. He could almost hear her laughter, high and sweet, ringing through the house when it wasn't so deathly quiet. The memory burned, vivid and raw, as if her voice still danced in the air around him. He placed the photo back into the drawer and shut it gently, securing the lock as though he were trapping the pain inside. Harold straightened, tugging at the cuffs of his tailored suit before glancing at the clock. It was time. The garage door hummed open, revealing Harold's sleek black car. The mansion's automated system came to life, the lights dimming behind him as he slid into the driver's seat. The engine purred softly, a mechanical symphony that did nothing to ease the heaviness in his chest. As he navigated the winding road down from the hills, the city stretched out before him, a sprawling maze of glittering lights and ceaseless motion. To anyone else, it might have looked like a land of opportunity, but Harold saw only shadows. Every corner, every alley, seemed to pulse with the life he had left behind, a life that had stolen Amber from him. At a stoplight, his gaze drifted to the rearview mirror, catching his own eyes staring back at him. For a moment, the face reflected there wasn't that of Harold Stanley, the respected businessman. It was the face of the man who had ruled an empire of fear and power, who had built his throne on blood and betrayal. The light turned green, and Harold accelerated, shaking the thought away. He didn't need to remember the specifics. The details had been etched into his very being long ago. His enemies had been many, but their hatred hadn't been aimed at him alone. Amber had been collateral damage, a cruel reminder that the father's sins rarely went unpunished. As he approached the towering glass office building that bore his name, Harold's phone buzzed against the leather console. He ignored it, stepping out of the car and nodding curtly at the valet. The staff greeted him with respectful smiles, but their warmth never reached him. Harold exuded politeness, professionalism, and an air of detached efficiency, making him seem utterly untouchable. But beneath the surface, beneath the suits and the empire he had rebuilt, Harold was a man haunted. Haunted by the life he had chosen, haunted by the laughter he could never hear again, haunted by the empty echoes of a house that would never feel like home. As he stepped into the elevator, Harold's hand brushed against his pocket, where the tiny brass key rested. The weight of it pressed against him, a small but constant reminder of what he had lost. The elevator doors closed, sealing him inside, and for a moment, Harold allowed himself to feel the emptiness. Then the doors opened again, and he stepped out, back into the world of power and pretense. The shadows of his past remained, lurking just out of reach. But Harold knew one thing with certainty. No amount of success could cast them away. The late afternoon sun bathed downtown Los Angeles in a golden haze, the city alive with the rhythmic hum of engines and the distant chatter of pedestrians. Harold Stanley gripped the steering wheel of his sleek black car as he navigated the congested streets. The polished vehicle seemed to glide effortlessly past clusters of honking taxis and impatient drivers, its luxury a stark contrast to the chaos of the urban sprawl. But then, a strange tension under his foot. The brake pedal felt wrong, loose. He pressed it again, harder this time. Nothing. The car began to accelerate on its own as gravity took hold, pulling him down the steep incline of Hill Street. A curse slipped past Harold's lips, low and controlled. His hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles whitening. He swerved to avoid a delivery truck, narrowly missing a vendor cart spilling over with oranges. Tires screeched, the sound slicing through the air like a warning siren. "Come on," Harold muttered, pumping the brake uselessly. The buildings lining the street blurred as speed overtook his control. His heart slammed against his ribs, but his face remained a mask of calm, an old habit from another life when chaos was the only constant. Ahead, the intersection loomed, teeming with pedestrians oblivious to the danger barreling toward them. Harold yanked the wheel, sending the car into a sharp turn. The maneuver worked for a fleeting moment before the vehicle struck a lamppost, flipping onto its side with a deafening crash. Metal groaned and twisted. Glass shattered into 1,000 tiny shards that glittered like malevolent stars. The world tilted, then stilled. Inside the mangled car, Harold's chest heaved against the restraining grip of the seatbelt. Blood trickled from a shallow cut on his forehead, blurring his vision. Outside, a multitude of people gathered as if drawn to a flame. Phones rose into the air, their small lenses recording the wreckage, documenting tragedy for their digital audiences. Voices mingled in fragmented concern. Is he alive? Someone should call 911. Careful, the car might catch fire. But no one moved to help. No one, except for two small figures standing at the edge of the scene. Judy and Janice had been wandering the streets when the crash unfolded, before their wide, wary eyes. They weren't more than 8 years old, their faces smudged with dirt, their mismatched clothes hanging loose on their thin frames. Janice clutched the strap of a faded canvas bag slung over her shoulder, while Judy, the bolder of the two, gripped her sister's hand. "Someone's in there," Judy said, her voice firm, despite the tremor in it. She tugged Janice forward. "We have to help." "We can't. What if it explodes?" Janice whispered, her gaze darting to the smoke curling from the wreck. Judy shook her head, determination hardening her expression. "Nobody else is doing anything." Without waiting for agreement, she pulled her sister along, weaving through the gawking crowd. The heat from the car felt oppressive as they approached, the acrid stench of burning oil stinging their noses. Judy dropped to her knees and peered through the shattered windshield. "Hey, can you hear me?" she called out, her voice louder than it should have been for her size. "We're going to get you out." Inside, Harold blinked against the haze clouding his mind. The voice was young, insistent. A flicker of movement caught his eye. A child? No, two. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. "Help me lift this," Judy said to Janice, motioning toward the crumpled driver's door. Together, the girls strained against the mangled metal. It barely moved. Judy's brow furrowed in frustration, and she scanned the ground, her eyes landing on a length of broken pipe. "Use this," she instructed, shoving it into place to create leverage. Sweat dripped from their foreheads as they worked, and with a creak of reluctant steel, the door gave way. Judy scrambled inside, unbuckling Harold's seatbelt with nimble fingers. "Come on, mister," she said, tugging at his arm. "We don't have all day." Harold let himself be guided, too dazed to resist. The girls supported his weight as he staggered out of the wreckage. His knees buckled once they were clear and he sank to the ground. Judy and Janice stood beside him, their faces streaked with soot and resolve. For a moment, Harold stared at them in stunned silence. The world around him faded, the crowd, the flashing lights of the arriving ambulance, even the pain throbbing in his head. He saw only their faces, Judy's fierce, unflinching gaze, and Janice's quieter, cautious concern. Amber's face unexpectedly flashed through his mind. The resemblance was startling. The same defiant tilt of the chin, the same spark of life, despite the odds stacked against them. "You saved me," Harold rasped, the words foreign on his tongue. Judy shrugged, her small shoulders rising and falling as if nothing had happened. "You looked like you needed it." For the first time in years, Harold felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. Gratitude, perhaps, or maybe hope. The beeping of monitors broke through the haze of Harold's mind as he stirred, his body sluggish and heavy. White walls surrounded him, sterile and impersonal, as if the room itself refused to acknowledge his presence. His chest tightened with the phantom weight of the seatbelt, and his breath caught when flashes of the accident resurfaced, screeching tires, the acrid smell of smoke, and their faces. "Good afternoon, Mr. Stanley." A soft, clinical voice drew his attention. A nurse in scrubs stood by his bedside, her hands busy adjusting the IV line. "You're lucky to be alive." Harold didn't respond immediately, his gaze flickering toward the window where sunlight bled into the room. "Lucky," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "That's one way to put it." The nurse smiled faintly. "Those two girls who helped you, they're the real reason you're here. If they hadn't acted so quickly—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "Girls?" Harold's brow furrowed. His memories were murky, but fragments surfaced. Small hands pulling him free, soot-streaked faces, and unwavering determination. "Yes, twins. Judy and Janice, I believe. 8 or 9 years old. Brave little things." The nurse paused, her voice softening. "They were worried about you. Didn't leave until the paramedics promised you'd make it." Something shifted in Harold's chest, a sensation unfamiliar and unsettling. He tried to dismiss it, but the image of the twins lingered. Can they come here?" The words felt foreign on his tongue, almost hesitant. The nurse's eyebrows lifted in mild surprise. "I'll see what I can do." Later that evening, the door creaked open, and two small figures hesitated in the threshold. Judy stepped in first, her chin slightly raised, as if daring anyone to challenge her presence. Janice trailed behind, her wide eyes scanning the room nervously. Their mismatched clothes looked even more out of place against the clinical backdrop of the hospital. Worn shoes, frayed hems, and shirts too large for their frames. Harold sat up straighter, his sharp gaze softening. You're the ones who pulled me out. Judy nodded, her expression unreadable. Yeah. You looked like you needed it. A ghost of a smile tugged at Harold's lips. I guess I did. Janice shifted her weight, clutching the strap of her bag tightly. Are you okay now? Her voice was quiet, almost tentative. Getting there, Harold replied, his tone gentler than he intended. Thanks to you two. An awkward silence, the kind that emerges when two worlds collide without a map to navigate the divide, filled the room for a moment. Judy broke it first, her hands jammed into her pockets. They said you wanted to see us. I did. Harold leaned forward slightly, studying them. The smudges on their faces, the cautious distance they kept from him. It all painted a story far deeper than their words could convey. I owe you. Janice shook her head quickly. You don't owe us anything. No, Harold said, his voice firmer now. I do. But I'd like to start with something simple. Your names. I'm Judy, the elder twin said, her tone clipped but not unfriendly. She gestured to her sister. This is Janice. Judy and Janice. Harold tested the names, nodding as if committing them to memory. I'm Harold. We know. Judy's lips twitched upward in what could almost be a smirk. It's on your car. Harold let out a soft chuckle, the sound surprising even himself. Fair point. Janice glanced at her sister, seeking silent permission before speaking. We didn't mean to bother you. We just wanted to make sure you were okay. You didn't bother me, Harold said quickly. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. I don't usually get visitors like this. It's a nice change. Judy's eyes narrowed slightly, as if assessing his sincerity. Why do you want to see us? Harold exhaled, his fingers tapping lightly against the edge of the bed. Because I want to know more about the two kids who saved my life. Judy's guarded posture didn't waver, but Janice's face softened. We don't really have much to tell, she said quietly. Try me, Harold countered, his tone gentle but insistent. And so, haltingly at first, the twins began to speak. They described nights spent in alleyways, scavenging for food from restaurant dumpsters. They spoke of their mother's illness and her eventual passing, and how their father had disappeared long before they could remember. Judy's words were matter of fact, while Janice's carried a tremor of vulnerability she tried to hide. Harold listened, his expression unreadable, but his jaw tightening with each detail. He didn't interrupt, letting the story unfold like pieces of a puzzle fitting together. Finally, Judy shrugged, her defiance a shield against pity. We get by. You shouldn't have to. Harold's voice was low, but the weight in it was undeniable. The twins exchanged a glance, unsure of how to respond. Harold leaned back, his gaze drifting toward the window again. You remind me of someone, he admitted softly. Who? Janice asked. Harold didn't answer immediately. Instead, his hand brushed the edge of the bedsheet, as if searching for something unseen. Someone I should have protected. The room fell silent again, but this time it was heavier, laden with unspoken truths and fragile connections. Harold turned back to them, his eyes steady. I'd like to help you, if you'll let me. Judy's chin lifted slightly, her skepticism evident. Why? Because no one else will, Harold replied simply. The twins didn't respond, but Harold saw a flicker of something in their eyes. Hope, fragile and fleeting, but there nonetheless. The car eased up the winding driveway, its quiet hum barely audible over the gentle rustle of wind through the trees. Judy and Janice sat in the back seat, their small figures dwarfed by the leather upholstery. They didn't speak, their eyes darting from the expansive lawn to the towering mansion that loomed ahead. The closer they got, the quieter the world seemed, as if the sprawling estate was a sanctuary entirely removed from the city they knew. Harold glanced at them through the rearview mirror, noting how Judy's jaw tightened, her shoulders squared as though bracing herself. Beside her, Janice clutched her bag tightly, her gaze flickering with a mixture of wonder and apprehension. The car came to a stop, and Harold stepped out, walking to the passenger side to open the door for them. "Come on," he said, his tone soft but firm. "Let's get inside." The twins hesitated, their gazes flitting between each other and the mansion. Judy took the lead, skillfully exiting the car with her bare feet, scuffing the immaculate driveway. Janice followed closely, still clutching her bag, as if it held the only things tethering her to familiarity. The mansion loomed over them like a fortress, its sleek, modern design, all glass and sharp angles. Harold led them up the steps, his polished shoes clicking against the marble. He opened the oversized door, revealing an entryway that seemed to stretch endlessly, bathed in soft light that reflected off polished floors. Janice let out a small gasp, despite herself, her eyes widening at the sight of the grand staircase, spiraling upward, the chandelier casting intricate patterns of light across the walls. Judy remained silent, her gaze scanning the room as if searching for hidden traps. "Come on," Harold said, gesturing for them to follow. "Let me show you your rooms." Their small footsteps echoed as he led them through the house. The air smelled faintly of cedar and expensive polish, a sharp contrast to the grimy, smoke-filled streets they had come from. Harold opened a door at the end of the hall, revealing a bedroom awash in soft blues and whites. Two neatly made beds sat beneath a large window, the sheer curtains fluttering gently in the breeze. "This will be yours," Harold said, stepping aside. Judy stepped forward, her hand brushing against the edge of one of the beds. She pressed down on the mattress experimentally, her fingers sinking into the softness. "It's so quiet," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. Janice set her bag down gingerly, her fingers trailing along the edge of the nightstand. She glanced at Harold, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is this really okay? For us?" "It's yours," Harold replied simply. "Everything here is." The twins exchanged a look, uncertain, almost disbelieving, but said nothing more. Harold watched as Janice carefully sat on the edge of the bed, her small frame dwarfed by the plush blankets. Judy remained standing, her gaze shifting between the room and Harold, her guard still firmly in place. "I'll leave you to settle in," Harold said, sensing their unease. "Come down when you're ready." He stepped out and closed the door softly behind him. Standing in the hallway, Harold exhaled, running a hand through his hair. The enormity of what he had just done weighed on him. But there was also something else, a flicker of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Later that evening, Harold stood in the doorway of the kitchen, watching as the twins sat at the long dining table. Before them was a spread of food: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and warm rolls. Janice was already eating, her bites careful and deliberate, while Judy sat stiffly, eyeing the table with suspicion. "Do you not like it?" Harold asked, stepping into the room. Judy blinked, startled, then shook her head. "It's not that. Just, this is a lot." Harold nodded, leaning against the counter. "You'll get used to it." Janice looked up, her voice tentative. "Thank you." Harold's chest tightened at the simple phrase. "You don't need to thank me." "But we do," Janice insisted, her eyes earnest. "Nobody's ever done anything like this for us. Homeless children." Harold said nothing, the weight of her words settling over him. Instead, he watched as Judy finally picked up her fork, cautiously trying the food. A faint smile crossed his lips when her expression softened at the taste. The following morning, Harold stood in his study, gazing out the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city sprawled beneath him, vast and indifferent. Behind him, his lawyer, Thomas, stood with a folder tucked under his arm. "Are you sure about this, Harold?" Thomas asked, his tone cautious. "Taking them in like this, it's not just a legal matter. You're exposing yourself." Harold didn't turn around. "They need a home." Thomas hesitated. "And what about your past? You know as well as I do that there are people out there who'd use this against you." Harold's jaw tightened. He thought of Amber, of the life he couldn't save. Then he thought of Judy and Janice, their faces so guarded yet so full of potential. "Let them try," he said quietly. Thomas sighed, but didn't argue further. As he left, Harold remained by the window, his reflection staring back at him. For the first time in years, he wasn't just looking at the city below. He was looking ahead. It seems the future didn't feel quite so empty. The soft buzz of Harold's phone broke the quiet hum of the morning. He glanced at the screen, expecting another routine email or a message from his assistant. Instead, an anonymous text stared back at him, its words sharp and menacing. "You think you're safe, Stanley? Think again. Everyone pays for their sins, eventually." His jaw tightened as he placed the phone down on the kitchen counter. Across the room, Judy and Janice sat at the table, their laughter filling the space as they argued over whose turn it was to pick the next movie for their evening together. Harold maintained a composed demeanor, determined not to reveal the turmoil brewing within him. But the words lingered. The day passed in slow increments, Harold unable to shake the feeling that eyes were watching him. When he stepped outside to collect the mail, his movements were deliberate, his eyes scanning the street for anything unusual. The once quiet neighborhood now felt exposed, its tranquility too fragile to trust. By the time evening rolled around, the twins had retreated to the library, where Harold had set up a small reading nook for them. He watched from the doorway as Janice curled up in a chair, her nose buried in a storybook, while Judy flipped through a collection of maps, her fascination with distant places lighting up her face. "You're staring," Judy said without looking up, her tone teasing but not unkind. Harold chuckled, stepping into the room. "Just making sure you two haven't turned this place upside down yet." Janice giggled softly, glancing up from her book. "Not yet," she uttered, barely raising her voice above a whisper. The room warmed with their presence, something Harold hadn't felt in years. He sat down across from them, his gaze thoughtful. "You two seem to like it here." Judy shrugged, her usual guardedness flickering back for a moment. "It's better than, well, everything else." "What was everything else?" Harold asked, his voice careful, not wanting to push too hard. Judy glanced at Janice, who looked down at her book, her fingers clutching the edges tightly. Finally, Judy spoke, her voice quieter than usual. "Sleeping on benches, sharing half a sandwich for dinner, hoping nobody would kick us out of wherever we found for the night." Harold's chest tightened. He leaned forward slightly. "And before that?" "Mum got sick," Janice murmured, her eyes still on the page, though Harold doubted she was reading anymore. "And Dad left." The room grew heavy with their words, but Judy's voice cut through it, firm and defiant. "We got through it. Together." Harold nodded, his respect for them growing. "You're tough, both of you." "We had to be," Judy said, her gaze meeting his. "But this," she gestured vaguely around the room, "this feels strange, like it's not ours." "It's yours now," Harold said, his voice steady. "As long as you're here, this is your home." The twins exchanged a glance. Janice offered him a small smile, while Judy's eyes lingered on him, searching for something unspoken. Finally, she nodded, as if granting him a tentative approval. That night, Harold sat alone in his study, the twins' stories replaying in his mind. The weight of their words was still fresh when his phone buzzed again. He picked it up, his stomach sinking as he read the message. "Did you think you could escape who you are, Stanley? You won't get away with this." The threat wasn't vague. It was personal. It was Roger. Harold's grip tightened on the phone. Memories of his past rushed in like a flood. Roger, his former rival, had been ruthless, someone who thrived on revenge and chaos. Harold had spent a decade building walls to keep that life out, but the cracks were forming now, and Roger had slipped through. He rose from his chair, pacing the room. His reflection in the window caught his eye, a man caught between two worlds, the ruthless survivor he had been and the father figure he was trying to become. His thoughts turned to Amber. He had failed her, and the loss had hollowed him out. But now, with Judy and Janice, he saw a second chance, a chance to protect, to make amends, to prove to himself that he could be better. But at what cost? The next morning, Harold woke to the sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. He found the twins there, Janice attempting to flip pancakes, while Judy teased her about nearly setting the stovetop on fire. Harold leaned against the doorframe, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You two are going to burn this place down," he said, stepping inside. Judy grinned. "Only a little." Harold joined them, helping Janice with the spatula. She looked up at him, her eyes bright. "We're trying to make breakfast. For you." "Well, I appreciate the effort," Harold said, glancing at the half-cooked pancakes. "But let's keep it edible, okay?" Laughter bubbled up again, filling the room with a warmth Harold hadn't realized he needed. For a moment, the weight of the threats and the shadows of his past lifted. But as he sat down to eat with them, his mind remained sharp. The twins were here now, a part of his life he couldn't lose. And if Roger or anyone else dared to come for them, Harold knew he'd do whatever it took to keep them safe. Even if it meant becoming the man he had tried so hard to leave behind. The park stretched out before them like a quiet oasis amidst the chaos of Los Angeles. Lush green lawns rolled under the late afternoon sun, dotted with picnicking families and children chasing after errant kites. Harold led Judy and Janice along the winding path, their small hands clutching the cups of ice cream he'd bought them from a nearby stand. Janice skipped slightly ahead, her face glowing as she marveled at the open space. "It's so big," she said, her voice soft but filled with awe. "Do people just come here to play?" "They do," Harold replied, keeping a steady pace beside Judy, who walked in silence, her gaze scanning the area cautiously. Janice turned to Judy, nudging her lightly. "Look at the swings. Can we try them?" Judy hesitated, glancing at Harold. He caught the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, as if waiting for permission. "Go ahead," he said, gesturing toward the small playground ahead. "I'll be right here." With a quick nod, Judy grabbed Janice's hand, and they darted toward the swings. Harold slowed his pace and positioned himself on a nearby bench to monitor their progress. As he watched the twins, he noticed how Janice's laughter rose with each push of the swing, a high, melodic sound that seemed to cut through the heaviness in his chest. Judy, ever composed, took longer to loosen up, but soon even she was laughing as Janice teased her for not going high enough. For the first time in weeks, Harold felt a measure of peace. But it didn't last. Across the park, under the shade of a large oak tree, two men stood with their backs to the path, their faces obscured by low baseball caps. One of them casually raised his phone, pretending to check messages, but the lens of the camera was aimed directly at Harold and the girls. His companion murmured something, and they both chuckled, the sound low and sinister. Harold's instincts prickled. His eyes darted across the park, scanning for threats, his gaze lingering briefly on the two men. They didn't look out of place, but their stillness amidst the bustling park set his nerves on edge. "Probably nothing," he muttered under his breath, leaning back slightly to appear at ease. But his mind buzzed with possibilities, each more dangerous than the last. Do you have a favorite park while listening to this story? Leave your name in the comments below and we'll guess where you're from. Later, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, the three of them strolled along the lake. Janice pointed out ducks gliding across the water, her excitement infectious. Judy picked up a small stone and skipped it across the surface, her lips curving into a rare, unguarded smile. "Not bad," Harold said, nudging her shoulder lightly. "Where'd you learn that?" "Mom," Judy replied simply, her smile fading slightly. She threw another stone, watching it skip 3 times before sinking. The air grew quiet for a moment, heavy with the weight of unspoken memories. Harold cleared his throat. "You two are pretty good at making a day better, you know that?" Janice giggled, and Judy tilted her head at him, her gaze curious. "What about you? When's the last time you had fun?" Harold hesitated, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "It's been a while." "Well, you're rusty at it," Judy teased, her tone light but genuine. "We'll have to fix that." By the time they returned to the mansion, the first stars had begun to dot the sky. Harold parked the car and stepped out, stretching slightly as the twins tumbled out with energy that belied their long day. "Wait here," Judy said to Janice, her voice suddenly firm. She disappeared inside the house for a moment, returning with a carefully folded piece of paper. "We made this for you." Harold took the paper, unfolding it slowly. The drawing was crude, but heartfelt, a small, colorful depiction of the three of them standing in front of the mansion. Above them, written in bold, shaky letters, were the words, "Our family." For a moment, Harold couldn't speak. His chest tightened and the edges of the world seemed to blur. He knelt down, holding the drawing carefully as though it might break. This is for me?" he asked, his voice quieter than he intended. "Yes," Janice responded, swaying back and forth. "Do you like it?" "I love it," Harold replied, the words catching in his throat. "It's perfect." Judy crossed her arms, her expression unreadable, but there was a softness in her gaze. "We wanted to, say thanks. For everything." Harold stood, tucking the drawing under his arm. He reached out, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. "You don't owe me anything, but this..." He looked at the drawing again, his voice firm. "This means more to me than you'll ever know." Later that night, as the twins slept soundly in their room, Harold sat in his study, staring at the framed drawing now resting on his desk. The image seemed to glow in the dim light, a reminder of what he had gained and what he stood to lose. His phone buzzed again, the screen illuminating another anonymous message. "Nice day at the park, Stanley. Enjoy it while it lasts." Harold's blood ran cold. The shadows were closer than he had feared. The morning felt unusually crisp as Judy and Janice walked down the tree-lined street toward the school bus stop. Their new backpacks, a gift from Harold, bounced lightly against their small frames, and Janice hummed a tune under her breath while Judy walked beside her, ever watchful. The sun filtered through the leaves above, casting dappled patterns on the sidewalk, but even this idyllic scene felt fragile, like a glass about to shatter. Judy slowed her pace, her sharp eyes darting toward a black SUV parked across the street. Its windows were tinted, and it had been idling there when they first left the house. "Stay close," she murmured, tugging Janice's sleeve. Janice blinked up at her sister, her smile faltering. What's wrong? Just stay close, Judy repeated, her voice low. Her hand found Janice's, gripping it tightly as they approached the bus stop, where 2 other children waited. But before they could reach the small group, the SUV roared to life, tires screeching as it pulled up beside them. The doors flew open. 2 men in dark clothing jumped out, their movements swift and calculated. Judy barely had time to react before a rough hand grabbed her arm. She screamed, thrashing wildly, but the man's grip was ironclad. Janice cried out, clinging to her sister, her small fists pounding against the second man who wrenched her away. "Let us go," Judy shouted, her voice cutting through the otherwise still morning. She kicked and twisted, her heart pounding as adrenaline surged through her. "Help! Somebody help us!" one of the men cursed, pulling a black cloth over Judy's face. "Shut her up," he barked to his partner. Janice's screams turned into muffled sobs as she was shoved into the SUV. Judy fought harder, her limbs flailing until the man dragged her inside too. The doors slammed shut and the vehicle sped away, leaving behind nothing but a fallen backpack and the echo of their screams. At the mansion, Harold was sipping his morning coffee in the study when his phone buzzed. He picked it up, expecting another anonymous threat. Instead, a text appeared with a single line. "We have the girls. 1 million by midnight, or you'll never see them again." Harold's blood ran cold. The coffee cup slipped from his hand, shattering against the floor, but he didn't notice. His mind raced, the words burning into his vision. His hands trembled as he dialed the number in the message. A distorted voice answered. "Stanley. You didn't think you could outrun your past, did you?" "Where are they?" Harold demanded, his voice a low growl. "If you hurt them, save your threats," the voice interrupted. "We'll be in touch with details. Midnight, Stanley. Don't be late." The line went dead. Harold stood, frozen, his chest heaving as rage and fear battled for dominance. The framed drawing on his desk caught his eye, its bright colors and hopeful message now a cruel reminder of what was at stake. He slammed his fist against the desk, the sound reverberating through the room. Not again. Not this time. The private investigator Harold retained arrived within the hour, along with 2 officers Harold trusted from his old life, men who had left the shadows as he had. Together, they pored over the ransom message, dissecting every word for clues. "They're professionals," the investigator said grimly. "They'll keep the girls alive, as long as they think you'll pay." Harold's fists clenched. "I'm not waiting to find out. What do we have on Roger?" The investigator hesitated. "He's been quiet for years, but if he's behind this, he'll be nearby watching for your reaction. He's not the kind to delegate something this personal." Harold's gaze darkened. "Then we make him regret coming out of hiding." One of the officers leaned forward. "We'll need bait. They'll expect you to show weakness. Play along until we can trace their location." Harold nodded sharply. His hands ached to act, to move, but he knew better than to charge in blindly. Do whatever it takes. Just get them back. Hours later, as the city began to glow under the fading sunlight, Harold sat alone in the twins' room. Their beds were neatly made, the stuffed animals Janice had lined up earlier in the morning still perched on the pillows. The absence of their laughter was deafening, and Harold's chest tightened with each passing moment. He thought of Amber, of the helplessness he had felt when he lost her. But now, with Judy and Janice, there was no room for helplessness. He wouldn't allow it. His phone buzzed again, and this time, the message contained coordinates. Midnight, as promised. Harold rose, his resolve hardening. He tucked the twins' drawing into the pocket of his jacket, a reminder of what he was fighting for. As he left the room, his footsteps steady but heavy, Harold's mind was set on one thing. He would bring them home, and anyone who stood in his way would face the full weight of the man he once was. The storm had arrived. Harold was ready. Harold leaned over the table in his dimly lit study, the glow from a single desk lamp casting shadows across his sharp features. Spread before him were maps, photographs, and a whiteboard scrawled with hastily drawn connections. Every detail mattered. Every scrap of information was a potential key to bringing Judy and Janice home. Around him, the room was filled with a tense energy, the weight of urgency pressing down on everyone present. The private investigator, a grizzled man named Garrett, pointed to the map pinned to the wall. The coordinates they sent placed them here, an industrial warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It's isolated, easy to control access in and out. Classic spot for a setup. Harold's eyes didn't leave the map. What's our angle? Garrett exchanged a glance with Detective Ryan, one of the officers Harold trusted from his old life. We send in a decoy, Ryan said. You deliver a dummy briefcase. Give them the illusion they're in control. Meanwhile, we've got surveillance teams in place to breach as soon as the girls are secured. And if something goes wrong? Harold's voice was low, measured, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed his fear. Garrett hesitated. Then we adapt. But we'll get them out. Harold straightened, his jaw tight. We're not adapting. This has to work. Ryan stepped closer, his voice steady but firm. Harold, this isn't just about strategy. You're walking into a trap, and you know it. Roger's not doing this for the money. He's doing this to get to you. He wants to see you squirm. Harold's lips pressed into a thin line. Let him watch, he said coldly. I'll play his game. But the moment those girls are safe, Roger is mine. As the plan solidified, Harold found himself alone in the study, staring at the framed drawing of Our Family the twins had given him. The bright colors stood in stark contrast to the darkness swirling in his mind. Memories of Amber crept in, unbidden and relentless. He remembered the day he'd found her crumpled picture book in the wreckage of his old life. The guilt had been unbearable, a crushing weight he had carried ever since. And now, staring at Judy and Janice's drawing, he felt the same suffocating fear clawing at him. I won't fail them, like I failed her. In a small, damp warehouse, Roger leaned back in a creaking chair, a twisted smile playing on his lips. The dim light of a single bulb swung above him, casting eerie shadows across his scarred face. On the table before him, a burner phone vibrated with an incoming message. He picked it up, reading the brief reply from Harold's number. I'll be there. Roger murmured, as expected. His voice was raspy, his tone thick with satisfaction. One of his men, a wiry figure with a perpetual sneer, stepped closer. You really think he'll come alone? Roger chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. Oh, he'll come. Stanley's predictable. He always has been. He thinks he can play the hero now, rewrite his story. He leaned forward, his smile hardening into a sneer. But he's still the same man who left blood in his wake. This time, I'm just making sure it's his blood. The man shifted uncomfortably. And the kids? Roger's smile faded, his expression darkening. Their leverage, nothing more. He stood, pacing the room as his voice rose. Stanley ruined me, took everything I built. If he thinks he can escape that, he's a bigger fool than I thought. In the corner of the room, Judy and Janice sat huddled together, their hands bound, but their spirits unbroken. Judy's sharp eyes glared at Roger every time he glanced their way, while Janice trembled but clung tightly to her sister. Don't worry, Judy whispered to Janice, her voice low but steady. Harold will come. How do you know? Janice asked, her voice small, barely audible. Judy glanced at her, her expression fierce despite the fear she couldn't fully hide. Because he promised. As the clock neared midnight, Harold stood at the edge of the city, his car idling just out of sight of the warehouse. Garrett sat beside him, adjusting a concealed earpiece while Ryan prepped the surveillance team nearby. "You're sure about this?" Garrett asked, his voice laced with doubt. "Once you step inside, there's no turning back." Harold didn't answer immediately. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out the twins' drawing one last time. The sight of it steadied him, anchoring his resolve. "They're my family," Harold said finally, his voice like steel, "and no one takes them from me." Garrett nodded, recognizing the finality in Harold's tone. "All right then, let's bring them home." As Harold stepped out of the car, the cold night air bit at his face. Ahead, the warehouse loomed like a specter, its broken windows glowing faintly from the light within. Every step he took brought him closer to the confrontation he had spent years avoiding. But tonight, there was no room for hesitation. The storm had broken, and Harold Stanley was walking straight into its heart. The air around the warehouse was thick with tension, every creak of the wind sounding like the whisper of danger. Harold moved silently, his steps deliberate as he approached the entrance. Behind him, Garrett and the tactical team blended into the shadows, their presence a comforting, yet distant, assurance. In his pocket, Harold felt the faint crinkle of the twins' drawing. It grounded him, even as adrenaline coursed through his veins. "Remember," Garrett's voice crackled softly through the earpiece, "wait for our signal. Don't do anything reckless." Harold didn't respond. His focus was on the heavy metal door in front of him. With a deep breath, he pushed it open, stepping into the dimly lit space beyond. The warehouse was cavernous, its concrete walls lined with rusting machinery and stacks of abandoned crates. A single bulb swung from the ceiling, casting erratic shadows that danced across the floor. Roger stood at the center of the room, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp, watching Harold with a predatory intensity. "Well, well," Roger drawled, his voice echoing in the emptiness. "Look who finally decided to show." Harold's eyes flicked past Roger to the corner where Judy and Janice sat bound to chairs, their faces pale but defiant. Janice's tear-streaked cheeks tugged at something deep inside him, while Judy's glare spoke of a courage that belied her small frame. "Let them go, Roger," Harold said, his voice steady, but carrying an edge. "This is between you and me." Roger laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Oh, it's always been between us, Stanley. But these two? They're your Achilles heel. The great Harold Stanley, brought to his knees by a couple of kids." He gestured to the girls with a sneer. "It's poetic, really." Harold stepped closer, his hands open at his sides. "You want your money? Fine. But this ends here." Roger's smile faded, replaced by a flicker of something darker. "Oh, I don't care about the money. This is about making you suffer." Before Harold could respond, Roger lunged toward Janice, yanking her out of the chair and pressing a knife to her throat. Her cry was muffled by the gag in her mouth, and Harold froze, his heart pounding as he raised his hands higher. "Easy," Harold said, his voice calm despite the panic surging through him. "Don't do anything stupid, Roger." "Stupid?" Roger spat, pulling Janice closer. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't about ransom. It's about taking from you what you took from me." Harold's mind raced, weighing his options. Through the earpiece, Garrett's voice urged restraint. "Hold position. We've got a shot lined up. Just give us time." But Harold knew time wasn't a luxury they had. Janice's wide, terrified eyes locked onto his, and he saw Amber in her, the same helplessness, the same fear. He couldn't let it happen again. "Roger," Harold said, stepping forward despite the blade pressed to Janice's neck. "You want revenge? Take it. But leave her out of this." Roger's laugh was bitter. "Oh, you'd like that, wouldn't you? Would you be willing to sacrifice yourself and take on the role of the hero? Not this time." His hand tightened on Janice, and Harold saw the knife press deeper. Harold's hand moved slowly toward his gun, his movements deliberate. His pulse thundered in his ears as he drew the weapon, its weight foreign and heavy. His mind raced, every instinct screaming at him to act, but doubt clawed at him. A voice whispering, "What if you miss? What if she gets hurt?" "Do it," Roger taunted, his smile widening. "Let's see if you've still got it. Or are you too soft now? 10 years of pretending to be a good man. Did it make you weak?" Harold's grip tightened. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of the decision before him. He thought of Amber, the daughter he had failed, and of the twins who had brought light back into his life. He thought of the promises he had made, to himself, to them. In that moment, clarity washed over him. He couldn't fail them. Not again. Harold exhaled slowly, his finger settling on the trigger. "Let her go, Roger." Roger's sneer faltered. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "You won't do it. You're not that man anymore." Harold's voice was cold, steady. "You're right, I'm not. But I'll do whatever it takes to protect them." The shot rang out, sharp and deafening, in the enclosed space. Time seemed to stop for a moment. Roger staggered, the knife slipping from his grasp as he fell backward. Harold had done settled over him like a heavy fog. "Janice!" Judy cried, pulling her sister into her arms. "Are you okay?" Janice nodded shakily, tears streaming down her face. He saved me," she whispered, her eyes wide as they looked at Harold. The sound of footsteps broke through the haze as Garrett and the tactical team rushed in, securing the scene. One of the officers placed a hand on Harold's shoulder, murmuring something reassuring, but Harold barely registered it. His gaze remained on the twins, who clung to each other tightly. Slowly, they turned to him, their expressions a mix of fear and gratitude. Judy stood first, pulling Janice with her, and together they walked toward Harold. "You promised," Judy said softly, her voice trembling but steady. "And you kept it." Harold knelt, pulling them both into his arms. The weight of the moment pressed against him, but so did the warmth of their small hands gripping his jacket. For the first time in years, Harold allowed himself to feel the full weight of his choices. He had crossed a line he swore he'd never cross again. But looking at Judy and Janice, alive and safe, he knew he'd do it all over, if it meant protecting them. The storm had passed, but Harold Stanley would never be the same. The ride back to the mansion was silent. The tactical team had dispersed, and Garrett offered Harold a few quiet words of reassurance before retreating to handle the aftermath. Harold sat in the backseat of his car, Judy and Janice on either side of him, their small bodies pressed close against his own. Neither spoke, but their presence, warm and steady, anchored him. As the car rolled through the gates and stopped in front of the mansion, Harold exhaled, his chest heavy with the weight of what had transpired. He opened the door and stepped out, then turned to help the twins. Judy jumped down, still gripping Janice's hand, and looked up at Harold with a mixture of defiance and gratitude. "You should have stayed in the car," Judy muttered, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. Harold almost smiled. "I made a promise." The three walked into the mansion together, their footsteps echoing through the vast, quiet halls. For the first time, the house felt like it held something more than its cold, opulent silence. It felt alive. Later, as the twins slept, Harold sat in his study, staring at the framed family drawing on his desk. His hands rested on the surface, palms flat, as if grounding himself. The events of the night replayed in his mind, Roger's sneer, the weight of the gun in his hand, and the finality of the shot. The moral weight of his actions pressed on him like a leaden fog. He had killed before, but this felt different. This wasn't about power, or survival, or revenge. This was about protection. And yet, the old guilt surfaced, clawing at him with its familiar grip. The sound of soft footsteps broke through his thoughts. He looked up to find Judy standing in the doorway, her small frame silhouetted against the dim light of the hallway. "Can't sleep?" Harold asked, his voice rougher than he intended. Judy shook her head and stepped into the room. She climbed into the chair opposite him, her legs too short to touch the floor, and studied him with the same sharpness she always had. "Are you okay?" she asked, her tone more serious than any child's should be. Harold hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I should be asking you that." Judy shrugged. "We're okay. Janice is okay. That's what matters." Her words struck him, simple yet profound. "What about you?" he pressed gently. Judy looked away, her fingers fiddling with the edge of her shirt. "I was scared, but I knew you'd come. You always do." Harold's chest tightened. "You shouldn't have to rely on me for that kind of thing. I wanted you to feel safe." "I do now," she said, looking up at him again. Her eyes softened. "You did what you had to do. I don't care what anyone else says." Her words soothed the pain in his heart, but they also served as a stark reminder of the risks involved. Harold leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "You and Janice mean more to me than I can put into words," he said. "I'm going to do everything I can to make sure nothing like this ever happens again." Judy tilted her head, her gaze unwavering. "Then stop looking so sad. We're here. We're okay. That's what matters." The next morning, Harold took a stack of old files from the safe hidden in his study and placed them into a briefcase. The evidence within was damning. Detailed records of Roger's operations, names, dates, everything Harold had kept from his old life as an insurance policy. Now, it was time to let it go. Garrett met him outside the police precinct. The investigator's expression was grim but approving as Harold handed him the case. Garrett stated, "This will resolve numerous unresolved matters. Are you prepared to end the relationship?" Harold nodded. "It's long overdue." As Garrett disappeared into the building, Harold stood on the steps, breathing deeply. The weight of his past had always lingered in the background, but today he felt lighter. Back at the mansion, the twins were waiting for him in the living room. Janice was curled up on the couch with a book, while Judy sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through a pile of colorful crayons. As Harold walked in, they both looked up, their faces lighting up with smiles that reached their eyes. "You're home," Janice said, setting her book aside and running to him. Harold knelt, catching her in a hug. Judy joined a moment later, standing slightly to the side, but offering him a rare smile. "Everything okay?" Judy asked. Harold nodded. "Everything's fine." Janice pulled back slightly, looking at him intently. "You're not going to leave, right? Ever?" Harold's heart twisted. "Never," he said firmly. "This is where I belong." Judy handed him a piece of paper she had been working on. It was another drawing, this time of the three of them standing in the park, their hands linked under a bright yellow sun. Written above it, in bold, uneven letters, were the words, "Our forever home." Harold stared at it for a long moment, his vision blurring. Then he smiled, pulling them both into his arms. "Our forever home," he repeated softly, the words a promise to himself and to them. For the first time in years, Harold felt like he could finally close the door on the shadows of his past. The present was brighter now, filled with laughter, love, and the family he never thought he deserved. The morning was calm, the sky painted in hues of soft blue and gold, as Harold drove the twins to a place he hadn't visited in years. Judy and Janice sat quietly in the back seat, their usual chatter replaced with a hushed curiosity. They had asked where they were going, but Harold had only smiled, his hands gripping the steering wheel a little tighter than usual. The cemetery came into view, its iron gates creaking open as Harold guided the car inside. Rows of headstones stretched out in neat lines, shaded by towering oaks. The atmosphere was serene, the kind of quiet that held weight, not emptiness. Harold parked near the far corner of the grounds and stepped out, smoothing his jacket as he moved to open the door for the twins. "Why are we here?" Judy asked, her sharp eyes scanning the rows of headstones. Harold hesitated for a moment, his gaze distant. "There's someone I want you to meet." The twins exchanged a glance before following him up a narrow path. Harold led them to a modest gravestone, adorned with faded carvings of flowers, and a single name etched into the marble: Amber Stanley. He stopped in front of the grave, his hands in his pockets as he stared at the name. "Amber was my daughter," he said softly. The words hung in the air, heavy but honest. "She was everything to me." Janice stepped closer, her small hand slipping into Harold's. "What happened to her?" she asked quietly. Harold's voice was steady, though the weight of his emotions was clear. "She was taken from me a long time ago. I couldn't protect her. I failed." Judy knelt down, her fingers brushing the edges of the gravestone. "Is that why you protect us so much?" Harold nodded, his throat tightening. "I lost her because of mistakes I made. But when I met you two, I realized I had a second chance to do things right." Reaching into his jacket, Harold pulled out a single white lily, Amber's favorite flower. He placed it gently on the grave, his hand lingering there for a moment. "Amber," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry I couldn't save you, but I promise, with everything I have, I'll protect Judy and Janice. I won't let anything happen to them." The twins stood on either side of him, silent but present. Janice rested her head against Harold's arm, while Judy crossed her arms, her gaze fixed on the gravestone as though silently introducing herself to the sister they'd never meet. "I think she'd be proud of you," Judy said after a long moment, her voice steady but soft. Harold smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth pulling upward in a way that felt almost foreign. "I hope so." As they walked back to the car, the weight that had clung to Harold's chest for years felt lighter, as though some invisible chain had finally loosened. The twins each held one of his hands, their small fingers fitting perfectly in his. "Are we her family now too?" Janice asked, looking up at him with wide, hopeful eyes. Harold paused, glancing down at the two girls who had transformed his life. "Yes," he said, his voice firm. "You are." As they drove away from the cemetery, the city's skyline came into view, the sun casting a warm glow over the buildings. Harold felt a sense of peace settle over him, the first true calm he had known in years. Judy leaned forward, pointing at the horizon where the sun dipped low, its rays streaking across the sky. "Look, Harold," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "It's like the world starting over." Harold glanced at the horizon, his heart swelling with gratitude and hope. "It is," he said softly. Hand in hand with Judy and Janice, Harold knew he had finally found what he'd been searching for all along. Not redemption, but a future filled with love and purpose. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, he was ready to walk it, step by step, with his family by his side. And as the car disappeared into the horizon, Harold whispered a silent promise to himself and to Amber. "This is a new beginning, and I won't let it slip away. Don't let it. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. Share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values, yet entertaining. See you there.